And also with me today is Brian Pugh. And Brian is our area agronomist from the eastern side of the state, covering about 40 counties. Brian, appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you, Nathan.
So, Brian, one of the major expenses a cow-calf producer faces is feed cost. And in feed, we do include hay. So hay cost is one of the major expenses that the cow-calf producer is faced with. And you think about that cost, Brian, after they harvest the hay, they cut, they rake, they bale. That's $25 to $30 expense per row. They move it out of the field, they go store it someplace, they incur loss, and then they move it back to the field. So one thing that we have been trying to do in Extension is reduce some of that expense, yet keeping the nutritional values for the cow. And one way that you've showed us as county educators to do that is late summer fertilization. Late summer fertilization talks about is the application of nitrogen fertilizer towards the end of August, early September. And with what we've seen in weather patterns and date of frost, killing frost, we have seen an additional ton of growth from that 50 units of added nitrogen applied at that time. So that's an additional ton of forage per acre for 50 units of nitrogen. Now we have seen that here at Perkins, and you have utilized that on this site with the cows here on the research station. Yes. So with that additional forage, what did you see? How much forage did you see? And what about its quality? How far did it take you along? And then we'll go into protein supplementation including that. So what did you see after that late summer fertilization, say mid to late August, and what it provided for you, Brian?
So typically on most research trials and then also on producer demonstrations that we have placed across eastern Oklahoma, what we tend to see is that we would ask that you fall fertilize about 1 acre per cow. And that should give you, as you said, an additional ton of production. On this side here at Perkins Research Station the last 2 years, we've averaged about 3,000 pounds of additional production in the fall with that application of 50 pounds of actual N.
Now that variation that you're talking about from 1 to 3, that was only based due to rainfall and weather conditions, right?
Soil type, rainfall, yeah, depending on, you know, how shallow or deep your soil is and the quality of that soil, that's really going to drive that fall yield after September 1 in most years as well.
And it could be decreased if we were to have an unusual early frost.
Sure, and we saw that this last year. Matter of fact, in most places in eastern Oklahoma, we were about 3 weeks early when we saw that killing frost, and that essentially shortens that window of growth that we would normally get on fall stockpile Bermudagrass.
Okay, so we talked about the tonnage and the yield, and people don't realize that all that you're really doing in stockpile Bermuda, instead of cutting, raking, and baling that hay and going to that expense of 3 times over the field, not including moving it from the field and back to the field, and we never include anything about labor and time because that's of zero value, right, Brian? But people's going to wonder about the quality of that forage that you're harvesting, and you're just harvesting standing forage. It's just like hay that's standing up.
Standing hay crop. Standing
hay crop.
That's right.
So what did that protein quality and TDN quality, what did it show in the places that you've done this, Brian?
Okay, on average, on our research trials that we've done on cows, we're seeing anywhere between, we say 10 to 13% protein is what you should expect. We've averaged right around 12% protein here at the Perkins Research Station the last 2 years. TDN or energy value of that forage has been 60 or slightly above, 60 to 61 here at Perkins Research Station. So again, remember, a dry cow needs about 8% crude protein and about 53 or 54% TDN in her diet. A lactating cow, a fall calver, needs about 10% crude protein, 59 TDN. So we're really meeting the requirements of both sets, either spring or fall calvers, there in that November, early December time frame.
Okay, so you say this is carrying from November and December. So as we continue into the winter months, Is there a whole lot of deterioration with the forage? What are you seeing a decrease? The protein's holding, but the TDN's going down.
Yeah.
Is that correct? That's what you saw?
We tend to lose a little bit of both, and a lot of that depends on the weather. So again, when we look at Bermuda grass that is dead and dormant, it's been frosted out, really the quality of that forage lies in the leaf material, not necessarily in the stem. So when we start having weather that's conducive to actually rotting that leaf or weathering that leaf off the stem, we lose a lot of that quality fairly quickly. So really wet falls, we'd expect to lose quality faster, and that means we might have to supplement those cows slightly in that December time frame, just depending on rainfall patterns.
So to take this a little further, you talked about supplementing those cows when that forage started to deteriorate. So a lot of people utilize cool seasons. You utilize cool season forages as a supplementation to meet that nutritional value and replace what you were losing in the standing forage. What did you use as far as your cool season pasture? Was it just cereal grain, a ryegrass, a combination? Tell us about that.
Okay, so just to back up one step, here at the Perkins Research Station, we didn't use any supplement when cows were on Stockpile Bermuda.
That was through December.
The last 2 years through the end of December, we're typically getting around that 60 days of grazing, and again, that's our OSU rule of thumb. 1 acre per cow should give us 45 to 60 days worth of grazing.
Okay.
So we're hitting that target November 1 to Christmas time or shortly thereafter to graze those cows with no supplementation on a spring calving herd, and we achieve that. After that forage is gone, then it's time to move to some of those cool season forages that you might have, and we did run a fairly moderate quality hay, and we supplemented that lower quality hay with the small grain pasture that you see behind us here actually. We only had about a 1/4 acre per cow of small grain pasture, but it was enough to do away totally with the supplement that we needed to purchase for the winter feeding period.
So by applying the 50 units of nitrogen at the end of August, early September at latest, you eliminated all supplementation and haying through the end of the year.
Yes, sir.
And then you provided, after the first of the year, you provided hay to them and supplemented the protein with cool season forages.
Yes.
And that continued throughout the winter.
Yep. Basically back until the time that those cool season forages started to actively grow again, mid-February, 1st of March, we start getting some days above 60 degrees, and then we were able to ramp up the amount of grazing time that the cows had on that small grain forage.
Okay, so just by applying 50 units of nitrogen, producers in our area are usually haying 150 days. Let's say from the 1st of October to the 1st of April. So you eliminated 3 months worth of hay with a 50 unit nitrogen application.
And again, typically what we see on most sites is with the Stockpile Bermuda, about 60-day reduction from it alone. And then based on the amount of cool season forage we have, we could have another 30 to 90-day reduction in hay that's required with that cool season forage. And we typically assume about $1 per cow per day savings when you look at the cost of fertilizing forage, growing it and making the cow harvest it versus hauling in that hay and supplement on the back of a truck.
Yes. You eliminated all the haying process, you eliminated all the hay usage to the end of the year, and you didn't have to require any protein supplementation. Their nutritional needs were met. So you zeroed out with 50 pounds of nitrogen applied, 50 units of nitrogen, you eliminated the entire hay cost and protein supplementation through the first of the year.
That's right.
For 3 months.
And if I could add one more thing, here on this station we're running about 42 head of cows on 115 acres, so it's not what we would call extensively stocked, it's pretty intensively stocked.
Yes.
And we were able to come in here and actually fertilize 1 acre per cow with the Bermuda grass and the 1/4 acre per cow of the small grains, and that essentially gave us about a 100-day reduction in the amount of hay and the amount of supplement that we would have to feed. We were right at $100 of true savings per cow in the first year that we implemented these strategies.
Okay, now you talked about your cool season and how you utilize that to replace your protein supplementation. What cool season did you use, and when was it planted, and you know what give us the details about that, what you put out there.
Okay, so we used a mix of small grain forages. In this location here, we actually had a mix of oats and wheat, and we did run some forage radishes with it as well, which would totally be optional for many producers. So again, what we try to do is get either that rye, oats, something that's going to give us a lot more fall forage production for that cow herd, and then we still rely on wheat, which tends to give us really good late spring production for that cow herd as well. So kind of complementary species there in a mix that spreads out the production over that cool season period of the year.
Okay. That sounds like some pretty good ideas to reduce a lot of expenses for a cow-calf producer. On your cool season, you use, there's a lot of producers, and I've worked with a lot here in Payne County. They use a cereal rye or wheat or a combination, throw in a ryegrass, and you mentioned radishes, turnips, bracus varieties. Can you tell us the seeding rate that you used on those cool seasons and that bracus?
Sure. Typically what we're going to do for, say, the oats, we'll run somewhere around 25 pounds. You can go higher than that if you want to. If we're incorporating that in a mix, we'll run at least 1 bushel of either your wheat or rye, or if you do both, you would come out somewhere around 1.5 bushels total between those species. If you're adding ryegrass, and we didn't here at this site because we do have some surrounding fields that have wheat in them, and again, ryegrass is a major weed to wheat, but if you want to add ryegrass, somewhere around 10 pounds of annual ryegrass would be a good addition to that mix. And any brassica species that you add, whether it's radishes, turnips, whatever it might be, you're looking only at about 2 pounds of that per acre.
And I know that sounds like a lot of expense, but you're eliminating all protein supplementation purchases.
Yes. That
was beyond the end of the year. That went into the spring because that carried you well beyond the first of the year.
Yes.
So it's more management, I understand.
It's increased management, and again, I believe when we looked at the economics of that, if you counted the cultivation, the tillage passes, the planting, the seed cost, the fertilizer, we were around $90 per acre, and we had about 10 acres for that 42 cow herd. But again, that just comes out to about $25 per cow, and it replaced that supplement for the entire winter feeding period. So again, it's pretty good economics to look at growing that forage, making the cow do the work, and get out there and harvest it herself.
Well, I know it sounds like a lot of expense, but if people would just total up the amount of supplementation they purchase in a year and divide it out per cow basis, they're spending a lot more than $25 a cow. I promise you that, if they're taking care of them cows properly. So that is a lot of the things that we've done concerning late summer fertilization, stockpiling Bermudagrass, and utilizing cool seasons to reduce a lot of expenses for the producer, and in return we're trying to increase their profits. I do want to remind everybody that since we're in this situation with COVID-19, that's why Brian and I are keeping our distance and trying to stay 6 feet apart. We hope that you have some questions about it, and we'll be glad to try to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for staying with us. Brian, really appreciate it. Brian Pugh, Area Agronomist from the eastern part of the state, mainly the Northeast District. Thanks for joining us from your location, Brian. Some fantastic work that you've done out there as far as demonstration and really reducing some costs for some producers. We do have a question for you. Brian, have you, due to the late season nitrogen application, have you seen an increase in the amount of winter kill on those Bermuda's fields that you've treated?
I think the direct answer to that would be no. No from the nitrogen application, and I think a lot of that is typically we're going in that mid-August to early September time frame. We typically get 6 to 8 weeks more growth of that Bermuda before frost hits. So we really allow that plant to restore carbohydrates to the root system, get back in that preparation stage for going into winter. We don't tend to see that as if maybe we went in first week of October and fertilized. I would say, on the other hand, I have seen some instances where we've probably increased our winter kill just based on how we graze that Bermuda. So if you're really making those cows graze that extremely tight and close to the ground, we're exposing a lot of those stolons on top of the ground, there would be some chance of additional winter kill there in the winter. But again, that's pretty few and far between. Good question.
So Brian, you're mainly saying that the winter kill stress is mainly from grazing management as versus the fertility application.
Yeah, typically what I do see on newly stockpile stands, working with lots of different producers that have just started this process, they always report their Bermuda is typically healthier the following spring. And that's because we've essentially boosted that root right before we go into that winter dormancy period. It comes out, breaks dormancy, and it's ready to grow much more actively than before. So again, if anything, I think it helps the health of that stand some.
Okay, Brian. We talked about late summer fertilization. I don't recall in our footage whether we stated it or not, but we're looking at latter part of August, at least by early September. Did we cover in there at what optimum height you would like that before the application's made?
No, we didn't. Really what we would like to see a producer do is take that back down to that 2 to 3 inch height that Dr. Rocatelli was talking about in his segment. We want to get it short because, again, we're trying to reset that forage growth clock, so to speak. We want to set it back into a young, vegetative, high-quality stage. So that's a major part of stockpiling compared to just having summer-grown deferred grass out there. We're looking to get it short and fertilize it, and then the frost kills it, and that locks that higher quality into the plant. That makes sure that we're meeting that cow's requirements.
Okay, Brian, we've had a question pop up and it leads to other things, but they're wanting to know the NPK application that was in the spring. And I'd like for you to add to this, if people aren't managing that Bermuda during the year and think they're going to come in and do 50 pounds only of nitrogen at the tail end of the year, their expectations aren't going to be quite as good as what you've been seeing on these well-managed fields throughout the year, correct?
Yeah, we definitely need to be addressing P and K. So, my preference is that the P and K had been addressed earlier in the spring based on a soil test. That's very easy to run through your county extension office. And if it was addressed, then we don't typically have to look at P and K applications in the fall. We just look at a nitrogen application. And again, 50 pounds of N should give us that additional 1 ton per acre. So I guess on these sites here, what rate of NPK was applied in the spring, I would answer that simply that we have very many producers across eastern Oklahoma that actually don't put any nitrogen down in spring or fall. They monitor P and K, and then they only put they don't put any nitrogen down in spring or summer. They simply move that application to the fall to stockpile it as a standing hay crop. So again, a lot of that is based on, how many cows do we have and how many acres? Again, simple stocking rate math, and we'd be glad to help producers with that too. But that tells us how much total nitrogen needs to be applied through the year. I hope that answered that question.
Right. Brian, what I was kind of leaning towards is if they did not meet the P and K and lime requirements early in the year, they probably can't expect to see the same results that you have seen on your demonstrations with just a nitrogen-only application that late. Do you agree with that?
Really depends on the soil type, but again, they will always have reduced yield if they're not addressing PK and pH compared to the optimum of that site. Some sites will give, 1,000 pounds per acre. Some sites could give 2 tons. But again, that's assuming that we're addressing that pH, phosphorus, and potassium, and then adding the nitrogen. So that's a good point, Nathan.
Yes, Brian, thank you. We have a question about the grazing practices on the small grains. And in our next segment, we're going to detail all the grazing practices of that small grain. So we'll get that question here in a little bit. Next question is, where are you guys at on having good annual rainfall levels how do you feel about this process working in a more arid environment, like on the west side of the state?
Excellent question. Matter of fact, I like to get this question because I always try to bring up Oklahoma has a very unique rainfall pattern. I call it a bimodal rainfall pattern. We tend to get peaks in May and peaks in September, those county fair rains that always wreck the county fair. And even across the state, we expect to get pretty decent rainfall in September, which is what we would be converting into forage, utilizing for forage production. And there's a lot of old research that shows with good fertility management of Bermuda grass, it only takes about 4 inches of rain to make a ton of production. So what I would tell producers to do, if you're in the west side of the state, go to some of the mesonet data that we have, look at the average rainfall levels in that late August, September timeframe. And if you can get 3 to 4 inches of rain, you should be able to make a ton of production if the nitrogen is there. And that's the key. We have to have that nitrogen to drive that yield. So that's a good question too.